Okay, now we're going to refactor this big mess of code that we're using to demonstrate some of the array functionality. Okay, so we have a pile of JavaScript here, and it's big and it's nasty. And we have a lot of code that we just copied and pasted. Some people call it editor inheritance or IDE inheritance, where you're copying and pasting code. But it's a bad thing. It's not something that we want to have. Because if there's a bug in here or there's something we want to change, we would need to change it in a bunch of places. So we're going to do some refactoring, which simply means that we're going to move things around, find any place where we have code that is duplicated, strip that out into its own function so we can call it multiple times. Okay. So right now we have a var cars that we're printing out. So again, we'll just run this right now and see the results that we're getting. Okay. So we're printing out some cars, we're printing out some more cars, we're printing out some prime numbers, we printed out some person information, and then we did a bunch of operations, a bunch of array operations, and reprinted a bunch of things, showing what the different results were. Okay. So to get started with this, I'm actually going to get rid of this cars portion up here, because we really didn't do anything more with that, so there's really nothing to refactor there other than just getting rid of it. We'll leave the prime numbers for now. We might not do anything more than with that, but for right now we'll leave that alone. So in this case here we have a person object, and then we start applying your names, age, occupation to this person, showing how you can actually do it, set up an object that way. And then we actually added a function to it. Okay. This is old enough to drive. Notice when I click on this in Visual Studio, how it highlights everywhere that this shows up. Okay, so we see it in here quite a few places. Some places just simply called, other places it actually has its own function. Okay, so that's going to be one of the things we're going to change. Before we change that one, let's change the other big one that is jumping out. And that is this block of code right here. So we were printing out this block of code over and over and over and over again. Okay? And it has typically started basically this code right here. It's pretty much always the same. You notice that we have a document.write BR is above here. So notice that looks a lot like that, which looks a lot like that, and that, and that, and that, and that, right? So anytime you would see code like this, if this was just in here twice, then that'd be bad. But we've done this over and over and over again. So let's fix that. We're going to fix that by, so I'm going to find my first instance up here again. So my first instance, I believe, is right here. So we're going to fix that by making this a function. And we're going to call this output array. Okay. And then we're going to have a parameter in here, array. Now in this case here, we actually needed to run this function, so I'm going to pass in people. In this function, what we're calling a function now, we were passing in people. Okay. So what I want to do is pass in the same people to this output array, but instead of printing out people, I want to pass in this ARR variable. Okay. So all we did here was take code that was specific to people, made it a parameter instead, and now we're calling that function, passing in what it is we really want to print out. Okay. So now what I can do is I can come down here and copy what we call that function. And right here, where we would call this whole thing, now I'm going to pass in more people, because that's what this one was doing. Okay. Here's another one. This was also using more people, so I just need to delete it. This one here was also doing more people, so I can delete that. This one here was also doing more people, so I can delete that. Copy output array again. This also is doing more people, so I can delete that. Okay. Paste it down here. This was printing out Bubba, so I can pass in Bubba now instead of more people, and then delete that. Copy this down. This was printing out more people, so I'll change that to more people, and then delete that. And we're getting to the end finally. This is also more people, so I can just delete that. I don't need to change that parameter. And the same thing is true here. So I'm going to delete that, paste an output array. Okay, so now we have that one function, output array, where we copied it over and over and over again. Now we have it in one spot. So if we wanted to change any of this logic, we can do it at one time, and it's going to work however many times we call this function. Okay. So let's run it, make sure we didn't break anything. And we did. Okay. So that's when I first got rid of my when I first got rid of all the cars. I'd also declared the variable I. And since I'm using strict mode, I need to make sure I declare that and not try to go in global space. And so I delete that code. So again, that's really, it's a great thing to have this use strict. That way when you're refactoring whatever else, that you don't accidentally start clobbering global space. All right. So here we are. We removed all the car information. We got our prime numbers. We're printing things just like we were before. Okay. So everything is getting printed just like it was. But we got rid of a lot of code, right? So still pretty long, but it's not as bad as it was. Okay, now we're going to refactor this function. Is old enough to drive. Notice it is actually listed in multiple places. So we want to refactor this. And to begin with, I'll simply copy this code, bring it up here, paste it in, set up this way, and now we're going to bring in an age as a parameter, and instead of saying person.age, we'll just say is age greater than or equal to 16. Okay. So we took that code that we had duplicated or even work in different ways, because we kind of copied and pasted it, and then we just kind of had our logic differently. But it really shouldn't be different. It should take in an age and return back true or false if that age is greater than or equal to 16 in this example. Okay. So all we have to do here is say is old enough to drive. So now if somebody calls person.is old enough to drive, they're basically going to be calling this guy right here. Okay? And in fact, we'll move that up just so he's with all the rest of the stuff. Okay? Cleans that up quite nicely. But now down here, we need to actually pass in the parameter. And you can see the IntelliSense here is telling us, oh, we expect age, right? Because in JavaScript, again, we have this function defined, and I can just simply say, okay, now I want to hang this function on my person object, and I could have called this anything, right? This didn't have to be called the same thing, but since the way we're doing refactoring, they are called the same, and that's fine too. But we do need to pass in this age. So we're going to pass in person.age. Okay. Let's run that. And we'll see that was this first line right here. Okay. And again, that's not really my real age, but I won't tell if you don't. Okay. Now let's see where else is old enough to find. We'll do it here. Is old enough to drive. Okay. And now when we call it, we need to pass in the age. Okay. Again, is old enough to drive. And then when we call it, we need to pass in the age. Okay. I think here is old enough to drive. Then when we call it, oh, this one too is old enough to drive. This one, same thing. And we're not calling it at this point because it's wrapped into that function. It's wrapped into this output array that we were doing. Okay, but that looks like that was the last one. So let's run that. And you notice everything's still working. All the values are printing out. The right ages are printing out associated to what they are. Okay. So I saw there's at least one more thing we can refactor. I noticed we had this here. Person info, child info. We had different values coming in, but everything else was the same, right? So let's fix that. Let's say we'll make a function. In fact, the other function we made, let's move that up here to this output array. We'll just move this up to the top. Okay. And let's make another function. And we'll call this, output info. Okay. And so this is one of the things we printed out. There's person info, and here's the other one, child info. So just to make sure we can compare them, you see we're printing out different pieces of information here, person or child, and then we're printing out the actual object's name, the age, and the occupation. Everything else is the same. Okay. So let's say we need to make sure that we explicitly either say person or child in this function. Okay. So I can actually type in prefix, right? Prefix, and then just to make it easy, I'll actually say person. Okay. Now, here, I'll change this to prefix. I'm going to delete this line since we're just out there for comparison. So now our function, move this over, takes in a prefix and a person. It prints out the prefix, and then it prints out the person's name, age, occupation, all of this other text, just like it did. So down here is where we're using it. So let's say output info. We'll pass in the prefix, and then we'll pass in the person. Okay. And now we'll do the same thing down here. We had it duplicated again. This time it's child info we want printed out. We will pass in child. And while we're at it, I will go ahead and put this with bold. Just so, since we have a bunch of junk on the screen right now, this will also help us see exactly where the two lines are that we just refactored. Okay. And again, that's the benefit. Assume that was something that we had to do as a requirement is we have this program that we've inherited from somebody, or maybe we did it ourselves, and now the client says, okay, well, I actually want this text bolded or done something with it. You typically wouldn't write out JavaScript, something for the client. This is not great code from that standpoint, but it's serving its purpose well of explaining originally how arrays worked and now how we can start doing some refactoring. So what this does show is the fact that since I've refactored this code down to a single function, that no matter how many times I want to print out this line, if I want to change the way it looks, whether I want to surround it in bold tags or I want to change the wording on here, I can do it in one place, and any place I reference this function will now get that same change. So let's run this, and now we should see both lines bolded. And here we are. So we see both the prefix is getting passed in, and of course the actual person objects getting passed in up here versus the child objects getting passed in down here. All right. So that's an exercise on how you can go about refactoring code. The code still isn't, it's not production ready code by any stretch, but it was never really meant to do that. But by having all that copy and pasting, it was a good exercise to be able to go through and show how you would go about refactoring that code.